Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all for inviting me here to Stratford today. I'm sure I've not been to Stratford too often, but I'm sure everybody must make some joke about being at Stratford for the first time, right? You know, taking the stage for the first time at Stratford and having a podium. Seeing that Stratford is known for a few theatrics each year. And theatrics, there's no shortage of that at Queen's Park either. Each and every day, we don't limit ourselves just to a summertime festival for theatrics at Queen's Park. But listen, it's a pleasure to be here to speak about WSIB and Bill 119. And let me just give you a little bit of a recap. Bill 119 was introduced, I believe, in 2008. It was went through first, second, third readings, committee hearings, and votes in the legislature. And it was passed at third reading in 2009. Now, Bill 119 has one purpose, in my view. Well, one main purpose and a couple other secondary purposes. But it was sold to people as a way to level the playing field, make it more fair for people. Right? Because, of course, we wouldn't want government to do things that was not fair for people. So that was the sales pitch for Bill 119. It came on the heels of a long-standing problem with WSIB, and that's the unfunded liability, which, depending on which reports you listen to and how it's measured, it is somewhere between, at a minimum, $14 billion and possibly as high as $18 billion. Now, of course, any other insurance company in the province that had an unfunded liability would be forced out of business and would be taken over. It's not allowed to have an insurance company with an unfunded liability. Unless, of course, it's government operated, then it can be. So they needed a mechanism to reduce that unfunded liability, and they viewed independent contractors as an easy way to raise revenues without raising costs. Right? Up until that bill, independent owners and operators were exempted from requiring the state-owned or state-legislated WSIB insurance and could engage in the marketplace for their own insurance. But with the passage of Bill 119, and I'll add this little bit more to the time frame. So 2009, the bill gets proclaimed into law, but it is not enacted. Okay? It's and we're not told. It's just left in limbo in 2009. And we're wondering, when is this going to come into force? Because all the bill said was it will come into force at a date named later. So 2009 it didn't come into force. 2010 it didn't come into force. 2011, well, there's a general election. For some reason, the bill was still not brought into force. And shortly after the October 2011 election, they announced that it was going to come into effect. It came into effect January of this year. Some people may think that the election time frame had something to do with bringing it into force. You know, that may have possibly the government of the day was fearful to get all these contractors annoyed just ahead of an election. That would be a cynical observation, I think. Nobody here would have that view, I'm sure. Anyway, it came into force, and this year. It will, depending on what trade you're in, will determine how much it's going to cost you. Each trade has a different rate classification. If you're a roofer, it's about $15 per 100 of salary that you have to pay. So a 15% take on your income. But that's at the high end. Most people in this room will be somewhere between the $8 and $10 an hour, or $8 and $10 per 100 of payroll that you have to pay for your insurance. I was speaking with a fellow down in Hamilton recently, a young fellow, he's a young contractor. For him, he was a carpenter. His private insurance, which covers him 24/7, 365 days a year, costs him a little over $500, $500 or $800 a year. His WSIB premium will be over $5,000 a year. And it only covers him while he's on the job site. So he's still going to have to keep his private insurance because he's a thoughtful, considerate, intelligent young man, and he's self-employed, and he wants to make sure that his family is cared for if he does get injured or become sick with an illness at any time. So he's gone from $500 or $800 a year for that, which he still has to keep, to an additional $5,000 in cost for the WSIB insurance. Multiply that over the tens and tens and tens of thousands of people. One of the things I think we can recognize, if you're self-employed or the owner of a business, you will never claim an injury through WSIB. Right? You would be absolutely foolish to make a claim for yourself on WSIB, right? Because anybody here who has dealt with WSIB, well, I'm sure you'll recognize, if you make a claim on WSIB, the business, their rate premiums will go through the roof, and the business will still have to pay for all the therapy and rehabilitation and whatnot that the injury caused. So there is, so it's a perfect story for the WSIB. We can raise revenues, but have be very confident that there will never be a claim on those new premiums. So you might ask, and I think it's important to ask, is why? Why did this come, and why did this come through? And what's the motivations behind it? I think it's important to look at what motivates government legislation. Right? Some people here might think that government policy, government legislation is determined by thoughtful people sitting around a table discussing what ails our society and comes up with a brilliant idea to fix what ails society. That's not quite my experience with government since 2007. What motivates government policy is special interest groups. That's what motivates public policy. Special interest groups that bring money and votes to the table. And that's what we're seeing with the College of Trades, the card-based certification, the WSIB Bill 119, are special interest groups who have encouraged government to bring out these policies. And most of the groups behind those special interest groups that I'm talking about are organized labor unions. That's who is bringing lots of money and votes to Queen's Park and encouraging these pieces of legislation. And it's done, it's pretty out in the open. I'm not sure if anybody here has heard of the working families. Anybody here heard of the working families before? Nope? There's got to be somebody here. Nope? Steve has. They spent $8 million in the 2011 election in election advertising against Conservatives, which is a big chunk of money, $8 million. And for their efforts, they've been doing this since 2003. Working Families is a group of building trades unions, including my former union that I used to work with, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, along with the United Association of Plumbers and Steamfitters, along with a host of public sector unions. And they spend lots of money at election time, and they get paid back with government legislation to improve their position and make it difficult for non-union contractors and businesses to stay in business. That is how public policy and government legislation is being crafted and created in our province these days, strictly by special interests. And there will be more of it. You can be absolutely sure. There will be more legislation that will affect you negatively, unless and until people become more involved and more engaged and more active in our public policy and in our democracy. Right? Right now, most people, and I can say probably most people in this room and every other room, are so busy earning a living and trying to raise their families and do things that we don't get overly engaged or involved in politics. And that's when bad things happen. When, in a democracy, when people disengage and are not involved, that's when special interest groups can bring forward their agenda. So I think it's important. That's one of the reasons why I held that protest for Bill 119 a few weeks ago, is to give an opportunity for contractors and tradesmen to express themselves at Queen's Park. And we expressed ourselves very fine that day. We haven't got Bill 119 repealed yet. We also had protests in Hamilton and in Ottawa. And I think we need to do more of it. We need to let government know that these things are unacceptable and there's a terrible, terrible consequence for this on that trend. But I will say this, contrary to conventional wisdom, democracy does work. The only thing it needs is people to be involved and people to speak out and people to be engaged. I've seen it time and time and time again. When people actually get involved and write letters to the newspapers, write letters to their members of parliament, write letters to their premier, to their ministers, get on the phone, make phone calls, politicians actually do listen if people speak up and if people take part. So that's my plea to the home builders here in this room tonight and across this province. I don't want to see our province continue along this trend line where it's becoming more and more difficult for us to find opportunities in this province. And I'll maybe just give one little image here. I have 4 kids, 3 boys, 1 daughter. My 3 boys are working out west. There's more opportunities there than there are here. That's not, has no comparison to the province of Ontario when I left high school about 40 years ago. 40 years ago, this province was a land of opportunities, endless opportunities, and out of high school, you could go out and make a living, and if you didn't like the job that you had today, you could go down the street and get another one tomorrow. Right? That's not the Ontario that we have now. It's to Ontario, I think we need to get back. And we can only get it back with everybody here being involved and taking part and engaging and making democracy work. Thank you very much.